What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Roundtable. We're switching up a little day, and we got a afternoon delight. So we have an amazing guest that's with us today, and we're very happy to have him on. And before we introduce him, just a couple things. First of all, my name is Oz. I am your host. And then my co-host, my main man.
What's up?
Always right here, and he's the smarter one out of the two of us. So
shut the fuck up.
I keep him around so we sound smart, and I'm just the sexy one. So
okay.
So that being said, Jesus, Mike, how you feeling today, my man?
I'm great, man. I'm feeling refreshed. Just got out of the shower. It feels weird being on at 1 o'clock. It's like morning time for me, so this is this is interesting. I'm waking up, but we'll it's gonna be great.
Yeah. So we had a late show last night, and after party. Had a great conversation. If you didn't get to see the regular episode, go check it out. We will have Richard back on because that was one of the most interesting conversations I think I've ever been a part of. And I say that with all due respect. I've never heard that position, that approach, that argument, anything. So I think it'll be fun to dig back into that. So that being said, the website, as you guys know that are always tuning on, it's up, and tart.live. All of our links are on there for YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Patreon, our Discord. Our Discord is a hit, man, and we're adding tons of people on a daily and weekly basis. So if you want to have a great conversation with great people, atheist, theist, agnostic, and some stuff I've never even fucking heard of, are on there. And but we have great conversations, and it's a lot of fun. So check that out. And then I think the last thing that I want to say is thank you. Thank you for. I meant to check before I jumped on and I forgot, but we're I think we're at 630 subscribers now, but we hit that 600 mark right around 2 months, and we can't say thank you enough. Like I said last night, I think it's fantastic, and we added some even since last night's show. So thank you guys very much. And then if I happen to see Samuel Doolittle jump in here, I know I said thanks on the last episode, but I actually got to read through 2 of the Second Coming comic books that he sent me last night and this morning. And I'm telling you guys, if you enjoy just good humor at the expense of the Bible, go buy the comics. They're hilarious. So and the artwork is right on par with the actual what the comic book is saying. So that being said, let's not waste any more time. We have a really exciting guest with us, and this is going to be more of a topic related episode. Usually on the roundtable we have the discussion with theists, and we get down to the why do you believe what you believe. But we're going to have a discussion today on some subjects in the Old Testament. And before I get any further into that, I want to introduce to you Dr. Josh. Josh, how are you feeling today, man?
Yeah, doing all right. How are you guys? Besides tired.
yeah, I'm lovely.
Yeah, I'm good. As I told you backstage, I started my afternoon drinking already, so that's a good sign. But no, we're Josh, we're very excited to have you, and very eager to get into this conversation. And before we intro even your platform and what you're doing, I always like to take time when other content creators are here for our listeners to be able to get to know you. Hear you, just talk on a human level for a minute. And what we'll tell you is, as we pull up information, make sure you go and check out their content, he and his partners' content. And I went through the website and the YouTube, and it's on point. It's amazing. But before we get to all that, Josh, tell us a little bit about you. From what I've heard, I think at one point you were a believer, maybe in the ministry, and now you find yourself as a skeptic and atheist. If you could briefly give us kind of what that journey looked like and how you ended up where you're at today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. I think it'll be a lot of fun. I got saved. I grew up in a Christian household, fundamentalist evangelical Christian household. So I was saved when I was 5 or 6. And I was a Christian for about 27 years, 25, 27 years, something like that. But did missions trips. I was in church 3 times a week. Joined the Air Force when I was 17. Immediately started holding Bible studies and going to Liberty University by distance learning so that I could get my bachelor's and then become a chaplain in the Air Force. So I ended up graduating from Liberty and going to Capital Bible Seminary, which is a very conservative evangelical seminary. Got my master's in theology there in Old Testament studies. Wrote my dissertation on the divine name El Shaddai, what it means in the Hebrew, and got accepted to Johns Hopkins. And my first year at Hopkins, being confronted with an onslaught, I would say, of archaeological and historical and ancient Near Eastern literary evidence, it just became very difficult for me to hold on to my Christian faith. So I became an atheist for about a year, and then sort of settled into a soft agnosticism, I guess. But that's where I've been. So I graduated from Hopkins in 2017, and my wife and I started this Digital Hammurabi to try to bring Hebrew Bible and ancient Near Eastern scholarship to non-specialists that are interested. So that's sort of what my journey was like. I pastored a church for 7 years. I was associate pastor of a church out in Virginia for 7 years, and I was a jail chaplain while I was doing that. So a lot of exposure to ministry.
Okay, awesome. And so my little brother is a pastor, still a pastor today, and he actually graduated from Liberty. So I don't remember what year, but yeah, that's where he received his education, so to speak. But no, thanks for sharing that, and that way we can continue to get to know some of the background. And then now here you find yourself today, and you guys have an awesome website and the YouTube channel and all those things. So before we get into the discussion, tell us a little bit about your content, what you're putting out there, what's your goal, and as you do that, I'll kind of let the viewers see the website and what you have out there.
Sounds good. Thank you. So my wife and I were both in the Assyriology program. So Assyriology is just the study of the languages and cultures of ancient Iraq. So Sumerian, Akkadian, we both learned those languages. So I both studied Hebrew Bible. And so when I graduated, she was still going. She's a couple years behind me in the program. And because of some life circumstances that were beyond our control, we had to kind of stay where we are currently. And so teaching wasn't really an option. I got a Fulbright scholarship and went to Germany for a year. So I was sort of hoping to get a teaching position, but it just wasn't possible to pursue it. So that left us sort of high and dry with 15 years of grad school in the ancient Near East and not really anything to do with it. So we started this YouTube channel first called Digital Hammurabi. Of course, Hammurabi is an 18th century BCE king of Babylonia. And so basically what we do is we make videos on interesting topics in the ancient Near East. We have scholars from the field come on to do interviews on what we consider maybe difficult or controversial topics. We started a scholarship program because PhD students are broke and they don't make any money during the summers. And so we did the first ever that I know of, crowdfunded PhD scholarship where we give $2,000 scholarships to PhD students in ancient Near Eastern studies or Hebrew Bible, Egyptology, to come on and to try to get them through their summers. We just started a Black Scholars Matter fund. So we're sending undergraduates, African-American undergraduate students who are interested in the ancient Near East to some of the annual conferences so that they can start to network and get to know people in the field and hopefully move into the graduate studies program. That's been made a lot easier because we just got our nonprofit status for the scholarship program. So that's been really fantastic. And we've also written a couple of books. There's a third one coming out. One's on slavery, the other's on learning ancient Sumerian for the absolute beginner. So yeah, it's been actually a lot more successful than I anticipated, because I didn't think anybody wanted to learn Sumerian. But that Sumerian, learn to read Sumerian video that we've got up has like 75,000 views or something stupid. So so we've got Learn to Read Ancient Sumerian series for free on the channel. We've got Learn to Read Ancient Hebrew. We got an Egyptologist to start teaching Middle Egyptian. So, that's just sort of the start. We'll eventually have Koine Greek. We'll have Aramaic, Akkadian. So, yeah, sort of what we do.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and for everybody that's kind of jumped on, we just had a few more people jump on. We'll have the links. The producers are putting the links and stuff up in the chat box. But make sure you go check out what they're doing. Like I said, I've taken the time to go through. They have a lot of content, so you're not going to get bored. So go through there. There's great stuff in there, and I was even watching some stuff as I was prepping for the show, and I love it. So I'll be watching even more here in the future. And the nice thing is, as you meet more people, they're creating content. It's like you're just reminded all the time, like there's some people out here that have amazing things to share, unique perspectives, and it's worth it to hit the subscribe button. Not even just for the creator, but for you and your knowledge and your education process. So, Josh, thanks for putting great content out there, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's interesting because, just real quick, when we first started, I thought, the ancient Near East stuff is really cool, but there are a lot of people that like the Old Testament. So I came across Mike Winger. I'm sure you know who that is, but he was. So I made a lot of response videos to. Sure. He did a video about Ezekiel 26 and the prophecy of Tyre. So I wrote a paper about it and then made a video response to him, sort of showing how it is a failed prophecy from our perspective. I did a 5-video series on the dating of Daniel, the book of Daniel. So if people are interested in that sort of stuff, how the Old Testament, how the Pentateuch was put together. So this idea of Mosaic authorship is problematic. So how is it that we got the Pentateuch that we have today? So a lot of stuff like that.
The more I talk to people on Discord and other places, there's definitely a huge community for that. There's a lot of people that are into that. It's one of the hardest things to market for sure. But the crowd is there. I know plenty of channels that they don't have, they might not even have broke 100 subscribers, and you go look at their background and compare it to someone who's got 100,000 who's got no education in it or something like that. And it's like, but it's like good for it's like a hidden gem for when someone like myself stumbles upon it, because I'm just like, oh, I got this source of information, that's like backed up by somebody who knows what they're talking about. And I get to kind of hide it from everybody else for a little bit,
It was sort of the thing that we did with there's a guy named What Do You Meme, who did a series on slavery against Cosmic Skeptic, and I said, well, that's just sort of silly. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit today, but that's where slavery came in. Why I started making content on it, because it was just sort of silly to see some of the things up that people were saying. So,
yeah. Awesome. And then at the end, we'll do a little Q&A at the end, Josh, and then we'll plug you again. I always like to plug in case there's people that, jump in halfway through.
Thank you.
We'll plug it again, and I want to make sure we send, as much traffic your way as we can. So that being said, let's get in the meat of this. So we kind of talked, like I said, backstage, and went through some notes and things, and really we have 3, kind of, I guess, lead-in topics, and it can go where it can go. Who knows where it leads us? But first, Josh, and we're just for the listeners, so we're really going to try to stay focused on Old Testament issues or problems or topics, however you want to title or define it. But first thing we're going to talk about is violence in the Old Testament. And I'll just throw, some of the hot button ones that we hear frequently. And then Josh, wherever you want to attack, maybe it's you have your favorite one, or one that you think's a hot button as well. But, we have the flood, and let's just kill everybody, because we don't like what they're doing, so I'm God and I fucked up. So now I'm going to annihilate everybody. Abraham and Isaac, which is my personal favorite. The abuse or assault. Some people try to say he was illegal age, so it was assault then. But that, and not only that, the trauma and the mind tricks that would play on a young man. Babies being ripped out of wombs. Soldiers being commanded to do that. The slaying and the killing or murdering of firstborns. And all this for what I call ego, from this Bible God. So those are just some of the hot buttons that popped up to my head as we were going through this. Josh, you pick one, and let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the most important thing in this discussion to bear in mind is distinguishing between sort of the thing that we probably assume people that are arguing against us on these types of topics, their position is probably, the Bible is the inspired, inerrant word of God that was, God breathed. And so everything down to, from the autographs, everything down to the individual grammatical forms was inspired by God. So whatever view of inspiration they would take, be it some mechanical view or, God moving through men of old, they're looking at the text and saying this is to be interpreted unless there's some poetic genre, that we see in the text, like the Psalms or something. We should be interpreting this literally, and looking at this as a historical or a scientific text. And, if you come at that from that perspective, that's where all of these questions become, as you're saying, very problematic. And I think it's important to recognize at the outset that if one were to take a step back from that hermeneutic, that literal interpretation of the text, that these passages can be seen very differently, and they should be seen very differently. Whether someone wants to hold to some different form of inspiration of the text, or just seeing it as ancient literature, it's important to make that distinction. So, for example, with the flood, if you go back and look at where Genesis, the two authors that we see in the Genesis account, P&J, where they got their story, this tradition comes from Mesopotamia, right? I mean, you can see it in the story called Atrahasis. You can see it as it came into the Epic of Gilgamesh in Tablet 11. So if you go back and look at those stories, or if you even go back, if you go back further and look at the Sumerian flood story, what you end up realizing very quickly is that the group of deities that are sort of sometimes individually, sometimes as a group, considered responsible for flooding the earth and destroying humankind, are pictured very differently than they are in the biblical text. And by the way, guys, just stop me if I'm rambling on, because I may do that.
No, that's what we're here for. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So if you look at
Dr. Justice, so we are here with pen and paper. Do your thing. Do your thing.
Copy that. So if you look at the Mesopotamian tradition, flood tradition, what you see consistently is that Enlil, for example, the main god that is charged with doing this evil act, is he's doing just that. The text says that. Enki tells him, or Ea tells him, you've done this evil thing, right? This bad thing by sending the flood. And it's because mankind has become too noisy, right? They've multiplied, and they become so numerous that it's not just a flood that Enlil sends. He sends a plague, he sends starvation. He tries these things to thin out the herd, right? Because it's just too noisy for him. And ultimately the flood succeeds, but the god Ea is able to, through trickery, save Utanapishtim or Ziusudra, whether you're reading the Sumerian, the Akkadian version, the Noah figure, and give him eternal life ultimately. So the biblical writers know this story, right? There's no question about that. And And what they're doing with it, if you take a step back from this hyper literal, reading this as scientific or a text or a historical text, meant to really say this is exactly how things went down in the beginning, from a historical perspective through our 21st century eyes. If you take a step back from that, it actually becomes a very beautiful piece of literature, because you can see what the authors are doing, right? The authors are saying in the biblical account, yeah, God messed up. You look at what the Yahwist says. It's creation in Genesis 2 is sort of like a trial and error sort of thing, and this spills over into the flood account. But ultimately, Yahweh is not the one that's held responsible. He's not this evil God that's bringing the flood in the narrative. In the narrative, it's mankind, right? That they've become wicked, evil, and so God is justified in the narrative. And this is really the polemic that the biblical text is trying to do. Now, the problem is that we here at this roundtable recognize this is a mythic text, right? This is a piece of literature, and so we look at people who are trying to say, okay, now let's go dig in the geologic, dig back through the sand, dig into the rocks, and find the flood layer. The worldwide flood layer. Hey, look, we found Noah's Ark. It's like, what? No, that's not what that text is doing.
And I'd even ask there, Josh, and I don't think the three of us necessarily have the answer to this. And real quick before, because I meant to say it before we dug into the topics. When we're discussing these topics, please keep in mind we're assuming that the position of the person that we are having this conversation with, if we were talking to a theist, a Bible-believing Christian, that they ground their morality in this book and in this God. So keep that in mind as we're going through this, that they believe that this is their absolute source of morality, and we're taking this from that stance. So, but the one thing that, like I was going to say, if anyone has an answer for this, but at what point does the creator, the all-loving, all-knowing, all-everything creator, have to stand accountable for the brutality and the bloodshed that he caused? Like, at what point is he accountable, and it's not the creation but the creator that stands accountable? That's what blows my mind is that, talking specifically about Bible believing Christians, that they can passively dismiss responsibility and accountability from their God and then own it themselves. No, it's because of me. It's because I'm dirty and wretched and all this. That blows my mind.
Yeah. And I'd say the answer is now, right? I mean, under our moral system that has progressed, that has been developed, and I'm not a philosopher by any means, but we look back at the ancient Assyrians, we look at the Babylonians, we look at what the authors of the Hebrew Bible are writing. We look at things like the violence, the Amalekites, Saul being commanded to kill men, women, children, infants.
Spare the virgins, though, right?
Well, not in that passage. It's kill everybody.
Oh,
yeah.
Right. Oh, so my bad.
I know what you're talking about. Numbers 31. With but you're absolutely right. I mean, it just depends on the passage, right? In this one, it's everything down to the infants, and I mean, it's very specific in the text. The infants, and yeah, I think that now is the time that it's. I guess what I would say is it's not the God that should be held accountable. It's the view of that God that people are holding. So that the theological position that says that I ground my morality in this deity in such a way that I look back to the biblical text and say, okay, look, it says here, God hates homosexuality, so kill all homosexuals, right? It's that form of the deity that stands guilty, right? But again, I don't think it's the deity. I think it's the people that have formed that theological position that stand guilty. And that's why I say in these discussions, I think it's really important for someone who was just like me. I mean, I was just like that for 25 years. You guys would not have liked me 10 years ago or 15 years ago, right? At all. I wouldn't like who I was, because I read the text in a very literal way, and I understood the earth to be 6,000 years old, right? And I understood that, the second coming, after the rapture was coming, God was going to wipe out all these sinners, and we might as well destroy the planet because who gives a fuck, right? And I think those people need to recognize, as I did, I'm sure as we all did, that there's another way to look at this ancient literature, and it doesn't have to be this God-breathed text. It can be at, I would say, even for a theist, it can be a text that represents people interacting with what they believe to be the divine, and how that manifests itself in literary form. And I think that's okay. But if you're going to be like a Matt Powell, right? That's the one that always pops to my mind now here on YouTube. If you're going to be that type of a person, and or like a Steven Anderson, and view the text in such a way, you stand guilty. You stand guilty, because this is what the text is saying. There's no getting around 1 Samuel 15. The command to Saul is to kill everyone, and he's punished. He's rejected as king because he fails to do it. He leaves the king alive and a couple of the best sheep, and it's Samuel has to go and kill them, right? So the text leaves you with no doubt that this is what's happening. So arguments from things like hyperbole, that you probably see in parts of the book of Joshua, these ancient Near Eastern war rhetoric. Yeah, there's probably some of it there. But John Collins, who was on our channel recently, the absolutely brilliant Hebrew Bible scholar, said, in order for you to have hyperbole, you have to have something to have hyperbole about, right? So it's not that they're out there, giving everybody flowers. You can't hyperbolize that, but you have to be killing a lot of people in order to hyperbolize it. And again, I think that these types of slippery, Paul Copan, and Paul Copan's a nice guy, but these Paul Copan, has got a moral monster sort of responses are just that. It's an apologetic response, trying to get out from under these things that, they're bad. They're just bad.
When you mentioned David and that, you could write a book on just the shit that he does. You have so much there. Just scratches a little tiny bit of the surface, and you would already be at how many infant deaths, and then sparing he spares the king though, right? And that reference.
Are you talking about Saul?
Yes.
Yes. And it's interesting because Saul doesn't like you say, he spares the king. And it's interesting that even when you get to David, they recognize to a certain extent, certainly not to the extent that we would see it today, but they recognize that you don't want blood on the king's hands, right? And so the text actually goes to great lengths to try to show David in the best possible light. It's interesting, when some of these really bad things happen and somebody gets killed, the text will often go out of its way to say, and David wasn't there. Yeah, and David didn't take part in that.
Yeah.
Or in 1 Kings 1, where you've got David's become old and Solomon's about to take over, and that whole story about the transition there. And the text says that David could not keep warm. He could not warm himself. And so they brought a young virgin to sit on his lap. But the text says explicitly, but the king did not have sex with her. It's like,
it's like, thanks for that side bit of information. It's like, but by the way, nothing happened.
But nothing happened. Yeah. We were lying in bed together naked, but we didn't do anything.
Is David, and I'm not as versed in the Old Testament by any means. There's a lot to go there, and usually I get sick by the time I'm trying to go through it. But is David the one who God has his firstborn son is going to have him killed because he spills his seed on the floor? Is that him? Or is that?
No, that's a little bit earlier in the text. It is back in the Pentateuch, but I just, it's interesting to me when I think about how people read texts like that, or even these clearly apologetic texts in the Old Testament, texts that are going out of their way to try to paint somebody in a better light than what they really are. And the violence that exists, the slavery that exists, a passage like Numbers 5, for example, where, you see the ritual of the wife who's been, that has a jealous husband, and doesn't know if she's actually had sex with somebody else because there's no evidence. He brings her before the priest, and the priest, I don't know if you guys know this ritual, but the priest has a concoction, gets some dirt from the floor of the tabernacle, and has her swear before God that she didn't have sex with any other man, and she drinks it. And if she's guilty, she essentially, her reproductive organs go kaput, right? And the idea probably implicit in the text is that this is abortive in nature, right? If you've got, because the text says there was a seminal emission that happened with a woman, and so, but people don't need to dance around these passages if, in fact, they take what I would consider to be a more logical hermeneutic, right? My wife is a Christian, for example. She's an Anglican, and none of these passages bother her at all. And it's because she recognizes the Old Testament to be another ancient Near Eastern text, right? In the same way that Enlil wiping out the world with a flood doesn't bother her. It doesn't bother her when Yahweh does it, because this is how people wrote. But she's not taking it literally. She's not looking at this as a historical text and trying to do like a what's that guy's name? Kent Hovind, and trying to argue for a worldwide flood.
Sure.
So anyway.
Well, so I was would ask like that, because like when you some people, they look at it like I've heard, and maybe you could elaborate on this more for people, but referred to whether you're like a dispensationalist or someone who's a proponent of covenant theology. Would that apply to the text in that way of how some people kind of reconcile it for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a Christian, I was called a hyper dispensationalist, an ultra dispensationalist. But I mean, the basic plot stands. And it's a very easy out, right? You say that God dispensed certain rules or certain practices or certain laws for different groups of people at different times. So the nation of Israel is given the law. We're not given the law. We're in the dispensation of grace.
Okay.
And so, essentially then you can sort of wipe your hands in your own mind. You can wipe your hands of the atrocities in the Old Testament if you even think about them, right? If you even consider them. The problem is that that if you're grounding your morality in this deity, and that deity finds it to be morally, I don't even want to say
permissible.
I don't even want to say permissible. I mean, morally, it's good. It's good to drive out the Canaanites from their homeland, right? To kill them as you do so, to slaughter the Amalekites in full, to wipe out the earth with a flood, which includes innocent children, right? This is the problem. This is part of the problem of evil. And it's incredibly problematic. And I think that even taking a dispensationalist approach where you can kind of, in a sense, turn your back on many of the laws in the Old Testament, as not for us today, you can't, I don't know how you can get away from that God at the time believing it morally permissible, morally good,
Sure.
To command or to do those things, if that deity's nature is immutable and it doesn't change. Because I think, as you guys know, once you say that it's not immutable, once you say that God can develop in his morality, well, then all bets are off, right? Now you can't say anything about homosexuality, because, well, I mean, that can develop, that can change, and we can recognize today that it's not a bad thing to be gay. Now, we can't do that because that one's constant. You see, So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it
very
seems
problematic.
almost like devoid of any real meaning behind what I would consider probably the most crucial part of morality is the analysis and what the motivations and the intents and all those that you go into it, as opposed to super devoid meaning. Well, it's okay here because I said it's okay here.
Yeah.
Now it's okay at this time because I said it's okay in this time. And
Yeah.
if that works for somebody, I would argue, how would you even know the difference at that point? Because it's if any person did that or anything did that, you're obligated to abide by that, and then it creates this just absolutely vacuous meaning of morality.
Yeah. And I think that this sort of thing carries over into just so I hit the things that you were talking about as they come back to my mind.
Sure.
Genesis 22 with Abraham and Isaac being sacrificed. And you again, if you don't take it,
he's salivating, by the way, just so you know at this one.
I mean, if you don't, just at the outset, if you don't take this as some literal historical event, and you look at it as a piece of literature, it's actually quite interesting, because it brings the Abraham cycle full circle. So Abraham is told in Genesis 12, leave your country and your kindred and your father's house and go to a land that I will show you. And he gets up and he leaves. And in Genesis 22, he says, take your son, your only son, your beloved, and go and sacrifice him at a place on Mount Moriah where I will show you. And he gets up early in the morning and goes. And the faith of Abraham is really what's on display there. The point of the story is not you're sacrificing your son. That's not, I mean, it is in a sense, but it's Abraham's faith. Because if you remember the story, everything that Abraham does from the beginning is God saying to him, I'm going to bless you. You're going to get all this seed. You're going to get all these nations. Everybody's going to come after you. And his response every time is, I don't have any kids. Like, I don't have anybody. What are you talking about? And I'm too old to have them. My wife's too old to have them. Have faith, Abraham. Have faith, Abraham. And so now and he tries to not supplant, but kind of do a workaround. Hey, look, I've got, this son, that nope, it's not that one. It's going to be from your, you and Sarah. And finally he gets his son. And finally the promise is going to come true. And God says, go kill him. And the literary aspect of that is so beautiful to me, because it's saying, will Abraham respond in faith to even this, the thing that shatters everything that God has said? And the answer is yes. Now, that's recognizing it as an ancient Near Eastern text, right? When you leave that and you go back and say, no, this is literally what happened, and this is the moral deity that has immutable morality saying to go kill your son. Now it's a horrible story. Like, what the hell? I mean, if this happened, I mean, the PTSD that Abraham would feel, it was just so horrific to be commanded to take your child and to go sacrifice them. And for us to then look back to that and say, I mean, what God, if the God comes to you and if a deity comes to you and says, go kill your kid today, I mean, what justification do you have to not do it? Mm-hmm. I mean, hey, I don't understand. I mean, it seems like it goes against everything that God has told me, which is exactly what Genesis 22 is. Everything goes against what Abraham has heard to that point, but he does it by faith. And so yeah, it's
and Josh, where
please.
The point I always make with that is, well, first of all, I'll hear Christians, believers say, well, it's symbolic. Okay, so are these things symbolic, or is this the infallible word of God that should be read as if everything's true and everything? First of all, let's make up our mind, on what we're reading here. But if we are taking it literal, which most Christians that you come in conversation with believe it's the literal God-breathed manuscript from heaven. Here's my position on Abraham and Isaac. Why it is my favorite topic or story to discuss, because I am a father of 6. I got four biological children, 2 bonus children, and if Dr. Josh was God and he said, Austin, in order to prove your love and your loyalty to me and yada, 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 I'm going to need you to take one of those, whichever one is your favorite. I want you to take that one and take it up on this hillside or mountainside. And I just want you to plummet a knife or a blade into their chest. And as soon as you do that, we're good, man. We're fucking peachy, right? So first and foremost, the thought process behind that is just talking about psychology, is psychotic, narcissistic. You're delirious at that point if you would actually ask a human being that you supposedly love and care about to do that. That's first. Then you get the argument, well, but Austin, he didn't actually have to kill him. All of a sudden the angel came in and said, well, psych, you don't actually have to do it. You talk about even more trauma, even more psychological, emotional abuse. Then you get, well, Austin, he wasn't a kid. Well, first of all, we don't know because the Bible doesn't spell that out. We don't exactly know what age, Isaac was when that happened. There's a lot of guesses, but there's no factual data there to tell us. But let's say he was, whether he's 13 or 33, there's still trauma involved in that. And if you're Abraham, how in the world do you still serve or follow a God that said, hey, kill your son, your favorite one, and then told you, no, actually, you don't have to do that. I was just fucking with you. How do you keep doing it? So that's always it's the fact that people take that literal blows my mind. But then even if you are going to take it literal, how you can justify or make sense of in your head is supposedly you're supposed to be more moral than I am as an atheist, because supposedly I don't have any morals, but yet you accept this. You think that's okay? Come on, man.
Yeah, and I mean, take it a step further in the problems in the text. God is testing him, and then when he does it, the text says, "Now I know." Now I know. Now, I mean, you could do some theological, dancing and say, well, that was, God condescending to Abraham to let him know that. It doesn't really mean that now I know. It means that I've always known, but just so that it makes sense to you. Sure, I mean, if you want to go that direction, but the text it's a test. It's a test, and everything with Abraham is a test. And again, if you see that for what it is as a piece of literature, my God, it's beautiful. It's as beautiful as anything else that I see in the ancient Near East, right? But it's when you abuse that passage, you abuse that document or that final edited piece of literature, and you say, oh no, I'm doing things with it that it was never intended to have done with it, then that's when I think it becomes incredibly problematic. So
that whole story, even just being dad, when I read that now, and I remember when I was a Christian, I read it and I didn't even, again, I'm not applying through logic and reason at that point, but I did. You just rationalize it. It's just, oh, well, it makes sense because that was God's will, but then when you step back and you start applying like actual logic and reason and critical thinking through it, you're like, no, hell no, this isn't okay.
Yeah. I mean, apply it. A lot of these things, I think just a really simple test is apply it anywhere else. Attribute these characteristics to any other human that you can find. You would have a narcissistic, self-aggrandizing person who demands things that we would consider to be horrendous abuse, right? Yeah. I mean, just what we would call it. But
Josh, if you did that today, or I did that today, regardless of the name of what God was in, we would fucking go to prison.
Oh yeah, immediately.
Like no questions asked. Like it's prison time. And don't even think about having any more kids around you. Like you're
exactly.
But before we move on, just to the next topic, I want to make sure because this next one I think we'll have a little more fun with it, and then we'll dig into really I think is gonna be the home run topic for us, and we'll bring it into their little more intense conversation, so to speak. But I have a couple questions, and I'm sure Mike will too on this. And we're going to talk about Genesis and creation, but I don't want to get into like the where the universe started, and that's not what I'm talking about, because we're talking about the old
Actually determinism and I'm a substance dualist. I'm just kidding.
And the and what just reading the literature for what it is, that's really what we're doing today. The first one I'll ask you, in your opinion and your studies and research, in reference to Genesis 1 and 2, is it out of order?
It depends on what you mean. So you've said this, assuming that this is to be read as yes, it's not even out of order. It's just it's contradictory. So what the world begins with is this watery mass is very different from what you see in Genesis 2:4, and following 2:4b and following. Because it's an earth that's dry. It's they're if you're reading it from that perspective, there are contradictions that I don't know how you would overcome them. So like I don't really even go much further than that, because I don't see any reason to. The way that the God creates, the way that the deity creates in Genesis 1 is very, very different from the way that he creates in Genesis 2 and 3. Genesis 1 is very majestic. He speaks and it happens, right? And he creates in a very literary style, right? It's 6 days of creation. The first 3 days are those days where he creates the realms of habitation, and 4, 5, and 6 are the days that he creates the things that will inhabit those realms, and they match up. Day 1 and day 4, day 2 and day 5, 3 and 6. It's a piece of literature, very clearly, and it's doing something. Whereas in Genesis 2, the God gets down and dirty, right? He's a potter, and he's taking up the dust, and he's forming a man, and he says it's not a good thing that he's by himself. Let me make a helper for him, and so he brings the animals to him. Here, how about this one, Adam? How about this one, Adam? No, not that one. No, not that one. Well, and so he makes one from his whatever we want to say, his bone, his side, his rib, whatever. In other words, they're so distinct that trying to reconcile them and to try to see some fluid narrative, or Genesis 2:4b and moving forward is being more specific and following up or something. These are just rationalizations, I think, and stepping back and seeing that these are distinct sources that have been brought together by a final editor, doing a purpose. I mean, for serving a purpose. I think is actually so much. It makes the task of understanding the different creation stories much easier, and it makes them far more logical.
No, that's great. Yeah, and I wrote that down in my notes here. I'm digging as far as I'd never heard it quite explained like you did, as far as the authorship, from 1 to 2, and so I appreciate that little tidbit. I'm gonna dig into that a little bit more now. But no, that was great. And then the funny one for me, and then if Mike has anything on this, I'll let him jump in. And hopefully Pasta's still listening, because him and I talk about this all the time. Josh, was it really a snake?
Yes.
You took my only question from me. Because I'm not even kidding too, because I don't even Genesis is so, and I apologize to Christians listening, but it's so laughable to me, that someone would actually believe that is true. I'm not to laugh at you, but to me it's to say, seriously, you're going to go with something that has refuting evidence that was the case, as opposed to actually having substantiated some evidence. So for me, it's Genesis, I just skip to, and I go straight to Exodus 21 or Leviticus, or whatever you want to get into. But Genesis is just so that already told me, that already itself told me it's not true. So I just move on.
Yeah. So, if we're looking at it, from the perspective of, trying to look ahead and see how the New Testament authors, or even late Second Temple period writers, toward the end, close of the first millennium BCE, how they understood the snake. Yeah. They're seeing this as certainly there's, Richard Averbeck has a really good article on this, 2004, I think, where he talks about how that snake is probably pulling from, there's this creation motif that kind of floated is not the right word, but that was present in the ancient Near East, where you have cosmic water, primordial cosmic water, and that water is often associated with, or has in it, or is it sometimes, a serpent or a dragon or something akin to that, right? And the deity that's doing the creating, or the deity that's responsible for it, has to battle, right? They call it the chaos kampf, like the cosmic battle that has to take place. You see this in Akkadian texts like the Enuma Elish. You see it in the Baal cycle in Ugarit, and you see it in older literature. But this serpentine idea is, I think, very much at play, both in Genesis 1, but specifically, I think they're in the serpent in Genesis 2. But it's a demythologized serpent. So, but it's a snake. I mean, that's how it's being described. Now, I know that when you get into later periods, theological interpretations of that text would say, oh, okay, well, this must have been Satan. Satan wasn't even a thing, right? You read through the book of Job. There is no devil in the book of Job, right? This is the adversary. The devil being some strong adversary of God, is in that sense that we understand him today, is a much later development. So yeah, I mean, the text is setting it up as a snake, and it's a snake that it's an etiological story, right? It's explaining origins. Think about the curse on the snake. He goes on his belly, he eats dust. I mean, you see this sort of thing all over the ancient Near East, trying to explain why is it that snake does that. Well, here you go. Here's the story behind it. So.
Yeah, and I always love that. As we said backstage, the argument that I hear most frequently on that, well, Oz, it wasn't really a snake. Well, then why did it say snake?
Yeah.
Why does it say serpent? Why didn't it say? I mean, how many other times? It's angel of the Lord, or the spirit of the Lord, or why wasn't it just a spirit? Why did it have to be the snake then? So it's that's more of a fun topic for me to talk about, and because I do love reptiles and I've owned snakes, and I can tell you, out of the ones that I've owned, I've tried to speak to them. They don't speak back. Just for the record, because I want my own scientific proof that they don't talk.
I mean, unless there are certain narcotics involved, they're probably not talking back. So
yes, I was sober, and they did not talk back. And several times I might have been drunk, and they still didn't talk back. So, but no. Before we get into the last topic here, and we have about let's see, we have about 15, 20 minutes to dive into this before we go to Q&A. And before we do that, Murder Shed Steve, if you'll throw Josh's banner back up there with the YouTube channel, please. If you guys are just jumping on, please make sure you go and subscribe and like and share with all your friends their website, their YouTube, and I'll let him plug it here before we jump off again. But I just wanted to make sure I saw a few more new names pop in. So I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of Dr. Josh and what he does and where you can find him and his content. He and his wife, I don't want to disclude her. They work together, so go check them out. They put a lot of great content, a lot of hard work, into it. I think Josh, you probably agree. A lot of people don't realize how much work really goes on behind the scenes. Doing what we do, and that's no like a woe is me, because we love it. We're passionate about it, right? That's why we do it. But there is a lot of hard work, behind the scenes to putting out a good product, a good looking product. So
exactly.
That being said, we're going to jump into our last topic for today's show. And Dr. Josh, we would love to have you back on and continue this and jump in some other topics if you would be willing to do that later on.
That'd be great.
Awesome. So the last one, and all the Christians are going to be, oh God, I knew they were going to fucking go here, but we're going to do it because I think it's applicable, and it's a conversation worth having, even due to our current climate, in our society, in our country, and I think this is the way that we can kind of have a voice on this. And talk about it and not get into all the politics, but actually get into some of the things that actually drive some of the evil that we still see today, and a lot of that can there's a lot of evil done in the name of religion, and I'm not just talking specifically Christianity, but there's a lot of evil done in the name of a religion or a faith or a belief, and I think we need to be bold enough and vocal enough to speak out and talk about it. So that's what we're going to do. So the next topic is we're going to talk about slavery, and we're going to talk about the biblical slavery, and even today what I consider is still mental or psychological and emotional slavery, and the way that religion still enslaves people. So Josh, we kind of talked about this beforehand. My question first to kind of tee this off is because the Christians' go-to argument is, well, that is not the same slavery as what we've experienced here, right, in our country. First of all, when I hear that, I get a little irritated because it's like, don't rationalize, don't try to justify. So my question is, and I'll just ask it plainly. How can anyone even read that text? How do you justify the owning of a human being, regardless of culture, time period, belief system? How do we even get there? Why is that still even a conversation today?
Or even
I have no answer.
Me neither.
I don't think, knowing what we know now, having the moral progress that we have now, trying to look back and say it was okay to behead people in public, right? Or it was okay to beat your children with wooden rods. In fact, it was expected. If you didn't do that, you didn't love your kids, right? And to say that that's morally permissible, there are lots of things that, even though people at the time didn't recognize them to be moral atrocities, that to somehow start with a text and say, well, this is my baseline, this is my inspired holy book, and therefore everything that's in it, as I understand it, must be morally sound. And now I have to work my way around that, given what I know about the atrocities that were involved with slavery, is disgusting, I think, to me. I don't know any other way to say it.
Totally agree.
And completely unnecessary, in my opinion. Even for a Christian, there's no reason whatsoever for you to try to rationalize or to justify Old Testament slavery, to try to make it not seem as bad as what it was. Don't do it. You do yourself a great disservice. Just understand and accept that it was a horrible thing as we see it today, and they didn't view it that way, and that doesn't make it okay.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and that's where and you gave the honest answer there. Is I don't know how people can justify that, other than they don't want to really question what they're believing and what they're promoting. They don't want to get down to that brass tacks, because then all of a sudden we have to start actually questioning our entire belief system. So I think that's part of it. But that comparison of the indentured servanthood, and trying to say, well, it's okay because back then, if people needed this, or whether the scenarios were that they sugarcoat everything, it's totally different than what it is here in our country, and what people years ago went through. They're brutally killed and hung and completely disgusting, right? That what happened, and they say, well, it wasn't like that. No, in Exodus 21, it clearly states that you can beat the shit out of them. You can beat the shit out of them, and as long as they don't die, you're good. So tell me how that's any different, other than if they did die, you got punished. But they literally they got to beat them and with no punishment whatsoever, as long as they didn't die. So that's where I struggle to get where they can connect those dots. Where especially Christians can connect those dots.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we take it to something like to try to get to the mindset of the ancient author, and to that legal tradition as it existed, and to see how it is that they understood that, how they would have thought about that. If you look in the Proverbs, for example, and you see the admonitions that are given to beat children, right? We see that as gross, and I would hope most parents would see that as gross. And let's not be beating our kids with wooden rods. I shudder to think that still happens, but I know that it does, which is scary. But in the mind of in the ancient mind, that was something that's how you brought them in line, right? That's how you showed them. That's how you showed them that you love them, right? In fact, the text Proverbs is very clear. If you don't beat your children, you don't love them, right? And the rationale behind that. So when you set a law in place, then the same held true for slaves. Proverbs 29 talks about a slave that is pampered from youth becomes a son, right? And the idea there in the proverb is that you beat them. They don't learn by words alone, right? They can't be instructed by words alone. And so when you come to Exodus 21, it's assumed that you're going to be beating your slave. It's assumed with a wooden rod. Obviously, you're going to be doing that in the same way you're going to be beating your kids, right? What the law is trying to do is to say, look, you can't just beat them however you like, right? You can't beat them about the head, I think probably is what verses 26 and 27 are getting at. You can't abuse them. But see, the problem is that we hear the word abuse and we think beating someone with a wooden rod, that's abuse. Well, they didn't see it that way. Right? Abuse would be doing things like beating them to kill them, right? So I think that, and the reason I wrote the book on I wrote a book on slavery, did the Old Testament endorse slavery? And the answer is yes. Obviously it did. The thing is, I think we need to, from both ends of this discussion, right? The far polarized fundamentalist evangelical Christian who says no is the good kind of slavery, to like a far other side where the text is saying God wants you to abuse your slaves, right? I don't think that either of those are correct. What I think we need to do is understand what it means, what they would have considered abuse, and what they would have considered abuse is very, very different than what we would consider abuse. And so trying to go back to Exodus 21 and to say, yeah, you know what? It's actually not such a bad thing that a father who becomes destitute gets to sells his daughter into concubinage or into marriage. Like that's cool. I mean, that's not so bad, right? I mean, what else is he going to do?
Shouldn't we look at this though through the eyes of the God, though, so to speak, to show, because wouldn't this be essentially these were handed down from him, right? Correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was handed down directly to Moses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he would have known at that point, what would have been right, ultimately wrong. Wouldn't he not have the foresight to understand that this is wrong, given that he is the objective standard for morality, as Christians like to claim?
Absolutely.
Without to their position, I just wondered if you see that the same way, because that's
So I guess what I would say is that if somebody is coming with this position, this fundamentalist evangelical position that says that, okay, I root my morality in God's nature, you've got a problem, a big problem, right? Because Leviticus 25:44-46 says very, very clearly, if you want slaves, male or female, you get them from the nations around you.
Yep.
Right? You get them from the resident aliens, the tenant farmers that are living in your midst. You keep them for life. You pass them down as inheritance, right? They are your slaves forever. Done. And in fact, in Leviticus, the deity recognizes at this point. And again, it's the priestly writer that's writing, but assuming this position, God recognizes that it's not a good thing to keep the Israelites as slaves. You can't do that anymore by the time you get to Leviticus 25. Exodus 21 with the covenant code, yeah, absolutely. Israelites, Hebrews can be slaves. Deuteronomy 15, no doubt. It gets a little better in Deuteronomy because you have to send them out after the 6 years with all kinds of cool stuff, right? And they get food and they get, they get provided for generously. By the time you get to Leviticus 25, can't do it anymore, right? The Israelites can't be slaves. You have to treat them as hired workers. If you're going to get, so the deity, God recognizes in some way that it's in the same way that charging interest to the Israelites is not a good thing, keeping them as slaves is not a good thing. But he doesn't abolish it. He says, well, you can't do that to the Israelites, but yeah, if you want slaves, get them from the foreigners.
Yeah.
It's a problem, right? There's no question about it. So that's why I think that interpretive model that somebody comes to the text with needs to be changed. They need to rethink how they're going about deriving their morals from God. In fact, there's a great book that John J. Collins wrote last year, and it's called What Are Biblical Values? And he goes through slavery, violence, rape, abortion, all these topics, many that we've talked about here. And he's showing, he's up at Yale, and he's showing the problems with trying to base your ethics, to try to base your morals on biblical values. It's not a good thing to do, right? And we have to, people that want to hold to that position really need to reevaluate the way that they're utilizing the biblical text, because taking it in that way, you're either going to have to form some apologetic that is not true to the text, or just ignore it.
And the one that I got was from that the one of the most outrageous ones that I've heard, and is from somebody who has debated some people I look up to, and I'm not going to name names because they're not here to defend themselves. That would be fair, but I will say that they related it to basically like garnished wages, is how they referenced it. It was like, well, you don't have a problem if the government takes your wages. If you owe them money, they owe you. They basically, in a sense, own your pay. You're working, and that's a form of slavery. And that's the kind of leaps that people have to literally, like, not even beat around the bush. They're like looking for the bush that they're supposed to be beating around. They're like in a forest somewhere else, making these claims. What would you say about people that tried to reference these to that time, though? Like, would you say that they're justified in the sake of looking? Clearly they're justified in the sake of looking at, like, well, yes, this is what humans thought, but on the aspect of a God sending this down, I mean, do you think it's even possible to, like, somehow have a respectable position in that apologetic at all? Do you think it will always be one of those things that's kind of, and it's always inherently immoral, or however you want to look at it?
Let's take it, to answer the question, let's take it out of the biblical text and let's take it to like Akkadian texts, something that everybody would say, including fundamentalist evangelical Christians. They would say that is not God-breathed, right? Yeah. You read through the Gilgamesh epic. There are lots of things in the Gilgamesh epic, for example, that we can glean ethically, morally. I mean, we're doing it through our lens, through our modern lens. But we can, in the same way that we look at a piece of art and we draw things from it, we do the same thing with literature. And so we do this with movies that we see today. We do it in books, fictional books.
True.
But if you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, I mean, you can see, for example, even though the text talks about him running through a tunnel to out on the sun. Hey, buddy. My 2-year-old has broken in. But
It'll be like that video of the newscaster and his kids come in. You've seen that one? And
Yes, yes.
running in, grabbing them.
It's like that. But you've got a story about a deity a man that's a king who's partly divine, right? And he goes and he battles the monster in the cedar forest, and he outruns the sun, and he goes to the ends of the earth to find the man that never dies, right? And he gets the plant of life, and a snake eats it and sheds his skin. I mean, there are all kinds of things that we would look at and say, yeah, this is fiction, this is myth, right? It's not fiction, it's myth. Right. And a lot of it's etiological, and it's trying to explain origins. We look at that, but we say, you know what? There are a lot of good things that we can glean from that. For example, when Enkidu, his comrade, is cursed by the gods to die, and you see Gilgamesh mourn. Like in the story, it's heartbreaking to watch him mourn over his friend. And he weeps over him for 7 days and for 7 nights until the maggot drops out of his nose and out of the corpses. And at that point, he realizes that all men die. And he goes on this journey to find immortality. I mean, it's beautiful and horrible, but I mean, yeah, it's a beautiful story. But the problem is that, for us, if we come to that story and try to say, okay, this is actually history, and we try to find the city of Uruk and then say, okay, what level was it in the archaeology where Gilgamesh did this? That's what? Like, come on, guys, recognize that text for what it is. And people do, right? But it's only when you come to the biblical text so often that people take a very different hermeneutic, right? They take a different approach, interpretive model, and they say, okay, we're not going to see this for the beautiful piece of literature that it is. No, we're going to try to have the text do things that it's not intended to do. So in that sense, I think that the slavery issue, we can let the text, we can use our modern lens to glean things from it that doesn't require a deity behind it, inspiring it, and B, if there is a deity behind it, inspiring it, the way that he inspires it doesn't have to be this inspiration that we see, this verbal plenary inspiration that we, that fundamentalist evangelicals often see, that I saw.
Sure. So. And I guess my last question would be, you don't see that as like a character flaw or anything or anything like that. You would just, like, how would you interpret the motivation there? Because it's a huge thing to want to, to make right, you know what I mean? And so, like, how do you see? Like, you just kind of see, like, you don't have to say I think they're lost or something, but like, what do you feel about the motivation of that? Does that, like, it doesn't bother you on a level of their character or anything like that, or
for someone that views the text as inspired and inerrant in that way?
Yeah, and then they're saying that this was okay because of that reason. I'm going to say that let's go with people that will kind of defend it in that right.
I understand it. I'm sure that you do too.
I'm actually was never a Christian, so I don't.
Oh, okay.
So that's why I asked you. I was never Christianity. Never had any of it, so it's very foreign to me.
I gotcha. Then I totally understand how it doesn't make sense. Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's akin to if you spent 30 years with someone and you went through thick and thin together with them, and you knew that they were a great person, you believed that they were a great person, and somebody came up today, to you and said, hey, Jim murdered somebody last week and we're taking him to jail. It would just be, but you wouldn't, it would just be so anathema, right? Your mind would reject the possibility because the character of this person. And there has to be some mistake. Particularly if Jim turns to you and says, I didn't do it, right? I mean, your brain would find, if it even entertained the possibility, your brain would find every conceivable way to move from that. And so I think for me, brought up in the Christian faith, understanding the Bible to be the inspired word of God, these things never posed a problem for me.
Okay.
because I knew God's character. Right? I knew that even if I didn't have an explanation that I thought was good, if I were to actually drill down into it, I knew that there was one. I just didn't know it. And that type of faith, I mean, it moves mountains. I mean, it really does.
To quote the verse, right?
Yeah. I mean, but having that confidence in the God of the Bible, I can't think of anything that really posed a problem. That's one of the reasons why when I got to Hopkins and was confronted with this, I mean, it really took an overwhelming amount of conflicting data in order to sort of make me awake from my faith slumber.
Sure. I think that's a brilliant response. I think that's gold clip right there. I mean, you're gonna that's something worth clicking on, in my opinion, with your response there. So I appreciate you answering that. That's brilliant.
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're invisible.
Yes,
that's pretty cool.
I'm invisible because all of a sudden, when we get to the good stuff, the devil knows when to attack my camera. Damn it, Satan. But no.
Get thee behind me.
Real quick, I was going to ask a question, but I just want to make a statement, and then we're going to go to Q&A with Dr. Josh. So I will make one statement real quick, and then let Josh plug away at his content, and then we'll get into that and wrap it up here in a minute.
Yep.
But the one thing I wanted to highlight is, and I actually saw a couple comments in the comment section about, God did not condone or command slavery. Maybe you're right that he didn't directly command it, but he sure didn't say don't do it. And he actually in the New Testament said to be good servants and obey your masters. So to me, he in a roundabout way didn't really have a problem with it, because after all, he is God, and he could have put it into it if he didn't really want it there. And we get into Romans and a couple other books in the New Testament where it says, this is what I was talking about, the psychological, emotional slavery, so to speak, that religion still holds today, is that you are no longer a slave to sin, but you are enslaved to God. You are a slave of God. So to act like God isn't a big fan of slavery and owning humans, you're just dead wrong. It's right there it's right there in the black and white when you read your book. So I just wanted to make that point, because I saw a couple of those comments in there, and I think that's disingenuous, and I don't think it's accurate. I think that's being irresponsible at best. So that being said, Josh, we really appreciate you coming on our channel today. So before we jump into the Q&A, real quick, plug your website, your YouTube, and all that. And I tried to pull your website and stuff back up, but like I said, when it gets good, my computer and camera go crazy.
No,
so, but go ahead and plug away, and then we'll
feel weird. I feel like I need an adult, like you're gonna sneak up behind me.
So I would say, just on the topic of slavery, if anybody is interested in looking at this is the book that I wrote on it this year, actually earlier this year.
100%.
It's an easy read. It's on Amazon.
Can you hold it one more time for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. If you go to our website, Digital Hammurabi or digitalhammurabi.com, you can get it. But did the Old Testament endorse slavery? And I know that's shameless, and I apologize, but it's not.
No, it's not at all.
If people don't like reading, that's absolutely fine. We have a video series on our channel specifically dealing with this. I put a few more things in the book because I thought about them as I was writing, but so you don't need to read the book to get the information. Just go watch the videos, but I'd rather read a book. So, God very clearly does endorse slavery in the Hebrew Bible, right? And I think we just need to accept that and try to work from it. Whatever your position is. So, but as far as our channel, Digital Hammurabi, is our YouTube channel, and digitalhammurabi.com is our website, and all the information there. Any publications that I have other than those 2 books, I try to make them free up there. So a couple of papers that I've written, my dissertation's up there. We're getting ready to publish my dissertation as a popular book so that people can, actually enjoy it. It's on scribal education, how kids went to school in the ancient world, and how people prayed in the ancient world. And we tie those 2 things together. But I just really appreciate you guys having me on. And anybody has any questions for me out in the audience, I'm game. I've got a little bit of time. So
okay,
go for it.
Right. I think we got a lot of questions.
Yeah, we got a ton. So, Dr. Joss, I don't know how much of our episodes you've seen, but this is a new thing we love to do. We're going to bring Murder Shed Steve in. He's the champion of our Q&A, and hopefully you enjoy this segment.
Q&A with Murder Shed Steve.
And Steve is.
All right, let's try that again. Brum, 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 brum. Hello, everybody. We're having a wonderful day talking with Dr. Josh. And we have a lot of questions to get to, so I think we'll get right to it. Oh, and that one was for you, Grumpy Cuss.
I saw his comment.
I'd like to bring everybody up on screen here. Oh, I got to do this right.
Boom.
And, wrong one.
Invisible Man.
All right. Thank you, Oz. First question here. Has Dr. Josh looked into the perennial philosophy, a perspective that encompasses all the world's major religions?
I have not. No, I don't think I've heard about that.
So I suppose you probably don't have any thoughts on it, do you?
I don't. Sorry.
Well, that's fair enough.
I have a quick thought, just that encompassing what you want or leaking emotion into it doesn't make it true. So they conflict each other.
I have a question from Atheist Jesus here. Do you have a question for Dr. Josh, Mike?
Whoa, who's this Atheist Jesus guy? You know what? I did have a question for Dr. Josh, but I had already asked it. No, I'm sorry. Austin stole it from me, like that he is. So I already got the answer. But thank you.
Well, I suppose Atheist Jesus, there's your answer.
Thank you, Atheist Jesus, for being a sexy, sexy person you are.
Oh, yes. You know what? I've also heard that he picks his nose. So I have a question here from Ashley. And actually, I suppose I should ask you, Dr. Josh, are you okay with answering a little bit more of a personal question?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. What is it like having such different beliefs in a marriage, and does it create tension?
It's interesting because there isn't any tension. And the reason behind it is her position is a faith position. And I know that seems like it's not so different from what other people would have, but it really, really is. And I'll tell you why. If you don't start with the biblical text as this inspired book handed down by God, that requires, your allegiance to the letter, it allows you to have a spiritual relationship and to be able to see the Bible for what I think it is, and that's an ancient document. And that the difference between what Megan believes and what I believe is that she believes that God has worked through that book, or is in some way working through parts of that book, or through, but in such a way that is completely foreign to what I would have believed, or what I believed 15 years ago. So we see things in exactly the same way. She just believes that that there's a God out there that loves her, and I wish that I believed that. So,
well, great answers. I've got another question here from CH2517 Joan. And this goes out to, I suppose, you, Mike, or Josh, or Josh. Do you believe the Bible is left by aliens as a cryptic text?
no question. That's exactly what it is. No. No, I don't think so.
And that's all the question is. It's just kind of your opinion or your belief.
One of the things that we see in Assyriology, you guys have probably run across this. Like if in ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerians, there's this idea that like ancient aliens seeded the world, and so I suspect that's probably playing on some of that, but maybe not.
Mike, do you have anything to say on that one?
Plead the fifth on that one. No, I don't. I don't. No, I think it was written by men, humans, part of great apes family. You know.
Yeah, I would just like to be presented with evidence for any claim. That's basically where I stand on any of that. Anyhow, let's see here. So I gotta say, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed this, Mike, but I feel so relaxed that Jeff is not here. Isn't it nice?
Oh man. Hashtag feud between murder. Wait, hashtag 5 days or how many ever days till you put Jeff in the murder shed and then we never hear from him again.
Well, come on.
Yeah.
There's a camera in here. So I've got a question here from Velocilobster, and this guy, I'll tell you what, I swear he's got claws for hands for real, because would, first of all, God create a world where slavery exists or is necessary to begin with? And this guy kind of bugs me almost as bad as Jeff. So,
yeah.
No, I think that's an excellent question that an apologist has to deal with. And so one of the claims that I hear all the time, and I deal with in the videos and in the book, is this idea that God is just working with sinful man, right? So he can't come into an economy that needs slavery and just eradicate it, because then what would happen, right? He's got to slowly bring people along. The problem is that the text itself doesn't bear that out. Right. So if you're coming at this from an economic standpoint, an economic necessity, God does away with it or makes serious problems in Deuteronomy 15 for the people that are holding, indentured servants, right? People that are paying off debts, because he says when you set them free, you got to give them a whole bunch of money. And the text anticipates the problems economically with that, and it says, don't think to yourself, oh, what am I going to do with it? How am I going to give them all this stuff? Because I will bless you, God says. I will supernaturally intervene to take care of this. So God says very explicitly, both there and in Leviticus 25, that supernatural blessing, supernatural provision will be made for the nation of Israel if they do these things that he commands. So that's one thing. God did away with it. God clearly shows that he can provide supernaturally for the people, doing things that are economically not viable outside of supernatural intervention. The other thing is in Leviticus 25, as I mentioned before, God does away with slavery for the Israelites. So he eradicates it there in the text for the Israelites. Can't treat him as a slave anymore. But he doesn't do it for the foreigner. So it's clear that God can do away with it, and God can supernaturally intervene to do whatever he wants with their economy, but doesn't. And again, this is simply a product, if you step back, it's simply a product of what they did in the time.
So I guess I would like a little bit of clarification on your answer. Is this assuming that God inherited human activity, or like came after humans already began slavery?
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Or did God create the world with slavery, or with slavery as a necessity, basically?
I mean, if you're looking at it from that perspective of the fundamentalist evangelical, I think the response is going to be God creates people with free will and sin as a product, and so. Again, I still think that's problematic, right? And very problematic. But
Right.
I think that is the response. But again, it's not something that God simply needs to put up with, because he doesn't. He doesn't just put up with it in the text. He eradicates it for the Israelites eventually, but just not for the foreigners.
Sure.
So,
Okay, so I've got another question here from what's happening here? There we go. Why excuse me, why would a supernatural entity would screw up his design unless if it was intentional?
yeah, and I think this is again, these are all questions assuming that, and I think it's a good question.
Sure.
If I think this is what the priestly writer is responding to in Genesis 1. So when the priestly writer writes, imagine, I mean, I guess think about it this way: either the priestly writer or the editor, the final editor, is coming back to this Genesis 2 creation story and seeing that God is kind of down and dirty and doing some trial and error, right? And he creates this this state of humanity. He creates these humans that continually fuck up, right? I mean, immediately in the story, and then they continue to do it to the point that it just, there's he needs to wipe them out in the flood. And the priestly writer in Genesis 1 is coming back and saying, whoa, God's not this bumbling is too strong, but God's not sitting here making mistakes. No, he speaks into existence these things, and he creates very good. This day is good, and after this, the creation is good, and the creation is good, and then ultimately it's very good. So there is no problem with God's creation. So these are the two conflicting stories that I think the writers are wrestling with. So.
All right, and I got one more here for you, and then we'll wrap up the Q&A section. Do you believe your biblical hermeneutics is flawless, or do you think there's any portion of it where you may have fallen victim to eisegesis? Sorry, these are words that I am just not familiar with right off the bat here. Reading into the text.
Yeah, so hermeneutics is just your interpretive.
I just say exit Jesus. That helped me learn. But then you just learn it the right way.
Yeah.
So, yes, I mean, the moment that any of us have flawless hermeneutics in any ancient text is, the day that we need to humble ourselves just a little bit more, because it's not going to happen. There's a book that just came out by David Carr, who's a prolific writer on formation of the Pentateuch, and he's a brilliant scholar. I don't agree with everything he says, but brilliant scholar. And he says in his book, this very complicated argument that he makes. He says, look, I've changed my mind several times during the writing of this book. So these are all, subject to some development or some change. So the moment that any of us think that we know it all, it's time to it's the moment that we don't know anything. And I don't know any biblical scholar. I don't know any scholar that would say they know it all. That tells me, somebody that says that, they probably haven't learned enough. If you think you know it all, you probably don't know enough. And almost certainly don't know enough.
I think that's a huge turning point for just about anybody who's seeking knowledge. Is basically, the way I say it is, you don't know shit until you realize you don't know shit.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's funny because, just a quick story, when I went to seminary, I was this mid-ex dispensationalist, fundamentalist evangelical Christian that, I mean, you wouldn't believe how much I knew. I mean, I knew everything.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember, fresh Liberty grad, and I step into the seminary, and I remember they asked me to write a paper on Hebrews 6, 4-6, which is this incredibly difficult passage for, anyway, they have you write a paper on it because there is no answer. There's no good answer. And I remember writing this paper and going, oh my God, I know the answer to this. This is so easy. And I remember writing it and turning it in. And when I got it back, I always say it looked like the professor had sacrificed a goat on it, right? I mean, it was just red, everywhere on this paper. And at the end, he said, "But this was a really great try, Josh." And I felt so bad for that professor because, like, how does he miss it? And then I learned Greek, and then I learned Hebrew, and then I learned I was a dumbass, right? And that's how it is.
Mm-hmm.
The more you know, the less you know. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you so much for answering all those questions, Dr. Josh. Appreciate
absolutely.
you. And thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming on the show. And I'll get off here and let Jesus Mike and Oz hop in and do their thing.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, it's time for my friend. His name is Steve. He's gonna ask me some fucking questions. So many in the comments. And Steve will answer them in his murder shed.
I love that one.
That's brilliant.
Plus added the one before. So I love that we have like a
No auto tune. Just saying.
no auto-tune included. But I love that like we have the intro and the outro, and you get, because it's kind of the two weird, creepy sides of Steve that nobody gets to see but us. He is a strange feller, and he actually sleeps in that murder shed. But no, to end it. Again, I just want to say thank you, Dr. Josh, for taking time out of your day today to be with us and hang out with us and talk about this. And what I like about these shows is, yes, it's three atheists, but remember, it is the atheist roundtable. So sometimes we're going to have these where it's not the the dialogue and the back and forth with the theist, but us get around and making each other better too, and strengthening our arguments and our position, or even challenging each other and why we disbelieve what we disbelieve, or hey, have you thought about this, or have you read this? So I think it's awesome, and I will be going to get Dr. Josh's book. That'll be done today.
Thank you.
So I'll be getting that, and you guys go check it out. Buy the book, like buy 10 copies and give them away. And that's actually and I once I go through it. If we have the same convictions there, which talk to you, I think we do. One of the things I do is I have I think I have 4 or 5 copies of God Is Not Great by Hitchens. It's one of my favorite reads. And I will, if I meet somebody, whether it's on here and I ship it to them, or in just my day-to-day life, try to keep a couple in the car, I'll give it to them. Like if you're really asking questions and you're skeptical, start here. Yep. And give them a little bit of that. So, but I'll buy that today. And if it's what it sounds like, that might be the 1-2 punch. There's God's Not Great, and the Dr. Josh Book of Slavery. No, I know it's not the title, but I wanted to make it sound like holy or something. But no. Before we close, Dr. Josh, anything you'd like to add?
No, just I really appreciate you having me on. This was a lot of fun, and really great questions from the audience. So thank you guys very much.
Yep, absolutely. So as usual, everybody's tuned in and watched today. You've been in the comments. You guys are the fucking rock stars, man. And we're not here and going full throttle at 600 something subs this quickly without you, and you telling your friends and your family and your grandmas and your grandpas about us. And we truly do appreciate that. So we will be on at 6:30 tonight with a debate between Cease to Know, which is one of our guys. He'll be the atheist in the argument, and then is it how do you say his name? Help me, Jesus. What's he go by? What's his screen name? I just went brain dead.
Necessitarian. Sorry,
necessitarian.
I call him Nessie, but I don't know. I don't know if he likes that.
Yeah, I couldn't remember because I kept for some reason I kept thinking of Libertarian Joker, our buddy, but I know that wasn't right. But yeah, Necessitarian. He'll be debating tonight at 6:30, so we'll host it here on our channel. And just so you guys know,
by the way, his real name is Jimmy. If you want to call him just by that instead of saying Necessitarian to anybody that wants to reach out to Etna or him, you can just, it's Etna and Jimmy. I'm going to dox them right now.
Okay. Oh, since we're just doxing everybody, all right. Etna and Jimmy will be debating today, and really the premise is, does God exist? Is going to what it's going to come down to. So come check us out 6:30, and in that one, I'm just going to be the mod and the host. So I will be drinking with you. and listening in and making sure they're not getting in fights or anything. No, they're great guys. That's not going to happen. But please come out and check that out. And then if you don't know, go to the website. Our schedule's on there. I'm going to be updating that here as soon as the show's over. So we'll have that on all on there. But let's rock and roll. We'll get out of here. Pull up our outro here. Get us done. But yep.